My name is Makla Zimmerman. I'm 29 years old, a paralegal living in Boston. For years, I believed family meant protection, loyalty, and trust. That illusion shattered the day my parents gathered us at the lawyer's office to announce my late grandfather's will. I was his closest granddaughter, the one who cared for him in his final years, yet my name wasn't on the inheritance papers. Every acre of his land, the Victorian house filled with his antiques, even the family business I helped manage, all signed over to my brother and my mother. They smiled at me like it was nothing, like I was invisible. I realized then that the family I'd sacrificed everything for had stolen not just my future, but my grandfather's legacy. That night, as I stood outside the house that should have been mine, I made myself a promise. I will take it all back, piece by piece. Tell me, if your own family betrayed you like this, would you forgive or would you fight? The silence in that law office was suffocating. I remember staring at the mahogany table, my hands gripping the edge so tightly that my knuckles went white. My grandfather's handwriting, once so familiar from birthday cards and small notes, was gone from the legal copy. What remained was a cold, typewritten document, signed and sealed, but without his warmth, his voice, his intent. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the congratulatory murmurs between my parents and my brother, Eric. Eric leaned back in his chair, smugness radiating off him like cheap cologne. "Guess I'll be the one keeping the Zimmerman legacy alive," he said, pretending to sound noble but clearly savoring the power. I wanted to scream, to claw the truth out right there in front of everyone. Instead, I swallowed the bitterness and forced myself to stay calm. Years in law firms had taught me how to keep a poker face, but inside I was burning. When the meeting ended, my mother touched my arm as if to console me. "Makla, you've always been independent. You'll be fine without all this." Her voice dripped with false sweetness, the kind people use when they know they've already won. I pulled my arm away and left without another word. That night, I drove past the old Zimmerman house, my grandfather's pride and joy. The Victorian stood tall under the moonlight, its white columns gleaming faintly, the wraparound porch casting long shadows across the lawn. I had spent countless nights there as a child, curled up beside my grandfather in his leather armchair while he read aloud stories of justice and courage. Now, it belonged to people who had done nothing but wait like vultures for him to die. I parked across the street, headlights off, and stared at the glowing windows. Inside, I could see silhouettes moving, my parents and Eric celebrating, probably pouring wine, maybe even toasting to their new fortune. My stomach turned. Memories of my grandfather's final months crashed into me. The way his trembling hands had still reached for mine, the way he whispered, "You're the strong one, Makla. You'll take care of what's left when I'm gone." He had trusted me, and I had failed him, or at least that's how it felt in that moment. I clenched the steering wheel until my palms hurt. I knew something was wrong. My grandfather would never have erased me from his will. Someone had forced this. Someone had twisted the truth. The betrayal cut deeper than any courtroom argument I had ever witnessed. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about being erased from my own bloodline, as if my years of sacrifice and loyalty meant nothing. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't just walk away. I would fight. I went back to my apartment that night with a notebook, sat at the kitchen table, and began writing everything I could remember about my grandfather's estate. Dates, conversations, where he kept documents, the names of his old lawyers and business partners, anything that could lead me back to the truth. It felt almost ritualistic, like I was building a case not just for myself, but for him. My hands shook as I wrote, but with every word, my rage hardened into resolve. By 3 a.m., I had one phrase underlined 3 times at the top of the page: "Find the real will." I couldn't sleep that night. Even after I scribbled notes until my wrist ached, my mind refused to quiet down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandfather's face, tired but kind, the way he looked during his final months. I saw his study, the shelves lined with dusty law books, the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco. I could almost hear his voice again, steady, deliberate, full of conviction. "Makla," he once told me, "a promise written is sacred. A document isn't just ink, it's honor. Never forget that." I didn't forget. That's why the so-called will they had shoved in front of me today felt like a slap across my very soul. It wasn't my grandfather's voice. It wasn't his honor. It was a forgery wrapped in legality. When I was a child, I was his shadow. While my parents were too busy hosting dinners and keeping up appearances in the city, I spent weekends in the Zimmerman house. I can still feel the creak of those wide wooden stairs under my bare feet, the way the morning sun poured through the stained glass window at the landing, painting the walls in colors of blue and gold. He let me wander the house freely. The kitchen always smelled of cinnamon and strong coffee. The library was my kingdom, rows upon rows of books that towered over me, waiting to be explored. But what I loved most was his office. A heavy oak desk sat in the center, its surface worn smooth by decades of use. Stacks of papers covered in his sharp handwriting, his fountain pen always resting neatly in its holder. I'd perch on the edge of the chair, swinging my legs, while he explained contracts, deeds, and cases as if I were his apprentice instead of a little girl. "Details matter, Makla," he would say, tapping the paper with his pen. "People lie, paper doesn't." I absorbed every word like scripture. Even back then, he saw something in me, a sharpness, a hunger for truth that no one else in my family cared to notice. My parents didn't like how much time I spent with him. My mother would wrinkle her nose and say, "You should be playing with girls your age, not burying your nose in dusty files." My father, always cold and pragmatic, dismissed it outright. "It's pointless. She'll marry, move away. Why waste time teaching her business she'll never use?" But my grandfather ignored them. "She'll use it," he told them once, his voice sharp. "Maybe more than you realize." He was right. Because years later, I became a paralegal, thriving in a field they never expected me to understand. Every case I worked, every contract I drafted, I carried his lessons with me. And yet, when the moment came to honor his life, my parents and my brother erased me, as if all those years of devotion meant nothing. The memory that haunted me most was the final conversation I had with him. He was frail, confined to his bed, his once commanding voice now a whisper. I had sat beside him, holding his thin hand in both of mine. "Makla," he rasped, "you've taken care of me more than anyone. You've earned what I built. The house, the land, the company, they're yours to protect. Promise me you'll keep them safe." "I promise," I whispered, choking back tears. He smiled faintly, squeezed my hand, and closed his eyes. That promise burned inside me like fire when I saw the false will. It wasn't just betrayal. It was desecration. My brother Eric was the golden boy, the chosen heir in my parents' eyes. He had never lifted a finger to help our grandfather, never spent sleepless nights rushing him to the hospital, never balanced the company books when he was too weak to do it himself. Eric was reckless, entitled, always craving attention. Yet somehow, he was the one they trusted with everything. I replayed the smirk on his face in that law office, the way he leaned back in the chair like a king. My mother beamed at him, proud, while my father looked satisfied, as if restoring order to the family by cutting me out. But they underestimated me. They forgot that I wasn't the little girl swinging her legs on the office chair anymore. I was a woman who knew the law, who knew how documents could be twisted, and who knew how to untangle lies thread by thread. As dawn crept through my apartment window, I stared at the notebook where I had scrawled my plan. My eyes were red, my head pounding, but a strange calm settled over me. I was going to find the real will, and when I did, I would make them regret ever underestimating me. I arrived at the law firm the next morning, bleary-eyed but determined. My office smelled faintly of printer ink and burnt coffee, a place I usually associated with routine tasks, drafting contracts, filing motions, proofing case notes. But today I was no paralegal. I was a client in my own secret case, and the stakes were everything. I asked one of the senior partners I trusted, Mr. Harlan, if I could speak privately. He raised an eyebrow but agreed, leading me into his office lined with framed certificates and shelves stacked with legal journals. When I explained what had happened at the reading of the will, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Makla, forgery in a probate case is not unheard of, but it's difficult to prove, especially when the opposing side is your own family." The word family felt like venom on my skin. I told him about the discrepancies I remembered, the exact phrases my grandfather had used in earlier drafts, the clauses he had once proudly shown me in his study. None of them appeared in the final version. Mr. Harlan nodded slowly. "If what you're saying is true, then the official document may have been altered or replaced entirely. Do you know where the original might have been stored?" "Yes," I said, my voice tightening. "In my grandfather's personal safe at the house." That answer opened a door in my mind I'd been trying not to look at. Because if the original will had been in the safe, and it was missing now, then someone in my family, had stolen it. I thanked Mr. Harlan and left before my emotions could betray me. 2 nights later, I drove back to the Zimmerman house. The driveway was filled with Eric's flashy car and my father's black Mercedes. The porch light glowed, but the house itself seemed different, colder somehow, as though it already knew it didn't belong to me anymore. I parked down the street and walked slowly toward the house, heart hammering. I wasn't planning on breaking in, not yet, but I needed to see to remind myself what I was fighting for. The rose bushes my grandfather had planted were overgrown, their petals bruised and falling. I brushed my hand against them and the thorns caught my skin, leaving tiny beads of blood. Fitting, I thought. This house had always drawn blood. Through the window, I saw my parents in the living room. My mother was sipping wine, her laughter sharp and brittle. My father stood near the fireplace, gesturing to Eric, who looked bored but smug as always. They looked like victors dividing spoils. I stood in the shadows outside, nails digging into my palms. That house had been mine in every way that mattered, my memories, my love, my work. And now I was a ghost at the window, watching strangers celebrate. The next day, I visited an old friend, Mrs. Whitmore, my grandfather's former secretary. She had worked for him for over 20 years, managing files, arranging meetings, knowing more about his business than almost anyone else. When she saw me, her lined face softened. "Makla, dear, I thought you might come." She invited me into her small apartment filled with plants and the faint scent of lavender. As soon as we sat down, she reached for my hands. "Your grandfather was proud of you," she said. "He told me you had the sharpest mind in the family. He said you'd keep the Zimmerman name honorable." My throat tightened. "Then why did the will say otherwise?" Her eyes flickered with unease. "Because I don't think the will they read was the last one he signed." My pulse quickened. "You mean," she nodded. "The last time I typed a draft for him, it named you as the heir, sole heir, Makla. He said you were the only one who earned it. That was just a month before he passed." I gripped her hand harder. "Do you still have a copy?" Her face fell. "No, everything was kept in the office safe. But I know what I typed, and I know what I saw him sign." The confirmation both devastated and electrified me. My suspicions were true, there had been another will, and someone had buried it. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my notes. My parents had lied. My brother had lied. They had rewritten history, and no one but me seemed to care. But I cared. I thought about the countless nights I had stayed up managing the family business books when my grandfather was ill, the mornings I had driven him to appointments before work, the afternoons I had read to him when his eyesight blurred. Eric had never done any of that. He had been off chasing women, crashing cars, and living recklessly while my parents excused his every mistake. Now, the reward for my devotion was erasure. Not anymore. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, a private investigator I once worked with on a case. When he answered, his gruff voice filled me with a strange mix of fear and relief. "Makla Zimmerman," he said. "Didn't expect to hear from you. What trouble are you in?" "The kind only family can cause," I replied, "and I need proof." The private investigator's name was Daniel Cross. A grizzled man in his early 50s with a smoker's cough and a permanent squint, he wasn't the kind of person you trust at first glance. But I'd seen him tear apart a case once, finding evidence hidden so deep the opposing counsel never knew what hit them. That was exactly what I needed now. We met at a diner just outside Boston, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the coffee was bottomless. Daniel slid into the booth across from me, setting down a battered leather folder. "Family inheritance case," he muttered, lighting a cigarette despite the sign above his head. "Those are the nastiest. People will slit each other's throats over old money faster than over anything else. Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the reading of the will, the missing clauses, Mrs. Whitmore's testimony, and my grandfather's final words to me. By the time I finished, Daniel was scribbling notes, his cigarette burning down to the filter. "All right," he said finally. "First step, follow the money. If your parents and brother push through a forged will, they'll be moving assets fast. Land deeds, bank accounts, maybe even offshore transfers. They'll want to secure it before anyone challenges the document." His calm certainty steadied me. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. 2 weeks passed. Daniel sent me updates almost daily. He discovered my father had liquidated one of my grandfather's smaller properties just days after the will was announced. The buyer? A shell company with ties to one of my father's business partners. Eric, meanwhile, had opened a brand new investment account, suddenly flush with cash he never earned. And my mother, who always claimed she hated paperwork, had been visiting the bank far too often, making discreet withdrawals. Each new piece of information was another knife twist, but also another brick in the wall I was building. Then came the most important discovery. Daniel called me one night while I was still at the office, hunched over legal files no one else cared about. His voice was low, urgent. Makla, I got something. Your grandfather's original lawyer kept duplicates of some documents, standard practice. I found out the archive exists, but here's the thing. Someone requested a purge right after your grandfather passed. Someone using your father's authorization. My stomach lurched. The duplicates are gone? Not all, he said. The purge wasn't complete. There might still be fragments, drafts, notes, maybe even a scanned copy of the original will. If we can get our hands on that, you'll have leverage. Leverage. The word rang in my head like a bell. But before I could celebrate, reality crashed back in. Because someone else had clearly realized I was digging. It started small, a car idling across the street from my apartment late at night, headlights off. The same man showing up near my office 2 days in a row, pretending to read a newspaper. My gut told me it wasn't coincidence. Then one evening, as I walked up the stairwell to my apartment, I found an envelope wedged into my doorframe. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words, printed in bold type: "Stop digging. Family first." I stood frozen in the hallway, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, my hands trembling. My neighbors passed by without a glance, unaware that my entire world had just shifted again. Someone knew, and someone wanted me to shut up. The next Sunday, I reluctantly joined my parents for dinner. My mother had insisted, "It's important we stay connected, darling, no matter the circumstances," which, in her language, meant she was suspicious. The dining room looked the same as always. Polished silver, crystal glasses, the long oak table gleaming under the chandelier. But the atmosphere was icy. Eric lounged at one end, smirking. My father carved into his steak with unnecessary force, his jaw tight. My mother smiled too sweetly, her eyes sharp as razors. At one point, my father looked up, pinning me with a glare. "Makla, you've been spending a lot of time with outsiders lately, poking your nose where it doesn't belong." I set down my fork slowly. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play coy," he snapped. "You're stirring up questions that should stay buried. For your own sake, I suggest you let it go." I forced a calm smile, though my pulse was racing. "For my own sake, or yours?" Eric snorted, raising his glass. "Careful, sis, you sound paranoid. Dad just wants what's best for the family." Family. The word again, wielded like a weapon. I excused myself soon after, retreating into the cool night air, my chest tight. They knew, they were watching, and they were warning me, but warnings didn't scare me anymore. They only confirmed I was on the right path. That night, I called Daniel again. My voice was steady, but my hands shook as I gripped the phone. "They know I'm investigating," I told him. My father confronted me. "They left a note at my door." There was a pause. Then Daniel said, "Good, that means you're close." People don't get desperate unless they've got something to lose. I hung up the phone and stared out my window at the city lights. Fear gnawed at me, yes, but underneath it burned something stronger: resolve. If they thought intimidation would stop me, they had forgotten who raised me. My grandfather didn't teach me to back down. He taught me to fight until the truth came out. And I would. Days blurred together after that warning note, but my determination only sharpened. I lived on caffeine and adrenaline, bouncing between the office, Daniel's updates, and sleepless nights where I combed through old records. Every scrap of information mattered, every small lead was a thread to pull. Then, finally, something broke. Daniel called me one Friday afternoon, his voice tinged with excitement for the first time. "Makla, you need to meet me. Tonight." We arranged to meet in the same diner as before. He slid into the booth carrying a flash drive, his usual gruff demeanor softened by something I hadn't seen in him before: respect. "What is it?" I asked, my voice hushed. He smirked faintly. "A scanned draft, not the final copy, but close enough. It names you Makla, sole heir. It's not notarized, but it's his words, his signature, his intent. This is what they didn't want you to see." My breath caught. My hands trembled as I plugged the drive into my laptop right there in the booth. And then I saw it, my name, written in my grandfather's familiar, looping script. His words were simple but powerful. "To my granddaughter Makla Zimmerman, I leave the Zimmerman estate, land, and company. She alone has earned it." Tears welled up, blurring the screen. For a moment, the noise of the diner faded, and all I could hear was his voice, gentle but unyielding. I whispered, "I knew it. I knew he didn't forget me." Daniel leaned forward. "This won't hold in court on its own, it's a draft. But it proves the official will is a fraud. Combine this with testimony, financial records, and maybe even witnesses, you've got a real case." Walking back to my car that night, clutching the laptop like it was a sacred text, I felt a fire ignite inside me. It wasn't just grief anymore. It wasn't just anger. It was purpose. But as I slid into the driver's seat, I caught movement in my rearview mirror, a black sedan parked 2 spaces behind me. No headlights, no driver visible. My chest tightened. I drove home anyway, heart pounding. The sedan followed me for 3 blocks before peeling off into the darkness. I realized then they knew I had found something. Back in my apartment, I laid out everything I had, my notebook of dates, memories, and discrepancies. Mrs. Whitmore's testimony, Daniel's evidence of financial irregularities, and now the draft will with my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. I stared at the collection, spread across my kitchen table like weapons. For the first time, it felt real. I wasn't fighting shadows anymore. I had proof, and proof meant power. The next morning, I returned to the Zimmerman house under the guise of a polite visit. My mother greeted me with her thin smile, offering tea I didn't touch. My father eyed me like a predator sizing up prey. Eric, as usual, lounged with his phone, barely looking at me. At one point, my mother leaned in, her voice low and cutting. "Makla, you need to let go of this obsession. Your grandfather made his choice. You can't change that." I looked her straight in the eye, my voice calm but edged with steel. "Funny, that's not what his handwriting says." Her smile faltered. For a flicker of a second, I saw panic in her eyes before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." But I did, and she knew I did. That night, I sat by my window, the city glowing outside, the draft will in my hands. I thought about the years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated as less simply because I was the daughter and not the son. I thought about my grandfather's trust, his lessons, his unwavering belief in me. And then I thought about how they had stolen it all, laughing in my face as they erased my name. I felt something shift inside me, solidify like steel. "This is just the beginning," I whispered. The game was on. The Monday after finding the draft will, I walked into work with a strange new energy. Everyone else saw the same Makla, hair in a neat bun, blazer pressed, files tucked under my arm, but inside I was burning with purpose. Every case I handled at the firm felt irrelevant now. The only case that mattered was my own. At lunch, I slipped away and met Daniel in the back of a parking garage, where he handed me a manila envelope. "Follow the money, remember?" he said, cigarette dangling from his lips. "I got bank records, land transfers, and a few things your father doesn't want you to see." I opened the envelope in my car. My hands shook as I spread the documents across the passenger seat. Property deeds had been transferred to shell corporations. Bank accounts swollen with sudden deposits. Eric's name on luxury purchases he could never afford on his own. One line in particular stopped me cold. A wire transfer from my grandfather's trust, dated 2 days before he passed away, authorized by my father. It was impossible. My grandfather hadn't been able to hold a pen steadily in those final days, let alone sign off on a massive financial move. Forgery, fraud, theft. The words screamed at me from the page. That night, I visited the Zimmerman house again. I didn't go inside, I couldn't stomach it, but I parked across the street and stared at the windows glowing warmly against the night sky. They were in there, no doubt laughing, eating, pretending everything was rightfully theirs. I was no longer the daughter invited to Sunday dinners. I was the enemy at the gate, and I realized something bitter. I had always been on the outside. As a girl, I wasn't encouraged to lead, to speak up, to claim my place. Eric was the one paraded around like the heir, while I was told to be supportive. My achievements, top of my class, thriving in law, were treated like hobbies. Eric's half-baked ideas were celebrated like genius. Now, stripped of my inheritance, I finally saw the truth clearly. My family had never intended for me to have anything. They wanted me small, quiet, useful only when convenient. But I wasn't quiet anymore. Daniel kept digging. One evening, he showed up at my apartment with a folder thicker than before. "They're sloppy," he said, throwing it on the table. "Your father's partner has been laundering money for years. The fake will gave him cover to move your grandfather's assets into his little web of companies. And your mother's name, it's on half of the transfers. She's not innocent in this." I felt my chest tight. I had hoped, foolishly, that maybe my mother had been a bystander. But no, she was just as guilty. "Makla," Daniel said, voice low, "this isn't just about inheritance. This is a full-blown conspiracy. If you go after them, they'll fight dirty. They'll try to ruin you." I looked him straight in the eye. "They already tried. They erased me. What more can they take?" The more evidence I gathered, the more isolated I became. Old family friends stopped returning my calls. Colleagues at the firm whispered when I passed by. Even neighbors, who once smiled warmly, now avoided my gaze. My parents' influence spread farther than I realized, and I could feel their shadow pressing down on me. One night, I received a call from an old family friend, Mrs. Green. Her voice shook. "Makla, I can't be seen helping you. Your father made it clear that anyone siding with you will be cut off." "I'm sorry, dear." I thanked her politely, but when I hung up, my hands trembled with rage. My parents weren't just trying to silence me, they were cutting me off from everyone I'd ever trusted. But they underestimated one thing. I wasn't fighting for their approval anymore. I was fighting for justice. The turning point came when Daniel uncovered a pattern. Eric had been funneling money from the estate into gambling debts. Receipts, transfers, even messages with shady bookies. My brother, the golden heir, was already burning through the fortune like it was gasoline on a bonfire. "Your father must know," Daniel muttered, showing me the files. "But he's covering it up. Probably too proud to admit his chosen heir is a screw-up." I laughed bitterly. "That's my family. Protect the son at all costs. Destroy the daughter if she gets in the way." Daniel lit another cigarette, studying me through the smoke. "So what's next?" I stared at the pile of evidence on my table, the forged transfers, the gambling debts, the erased will. My chest swelled with something between grief and fury. "What's next?" I said, my voice steady. "I build my case, piece by piece. And when I'm ready, I'll burn their lies to the ground." Word spread faster than I expected. Within a week, whispers followed me everywhere. At the firm, I noticed colleagues lowering their voices when I walked by, their eyes flicking toward me before quickly darting away. At the grocery store, an old neighbor who once hugged me every Christmas turned her cart abruptly and disappeared down another aisle. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then one of my coworkers, a timid assistant named Claire, slipped into my office and shut the door. "Makla," she whispered, her face pale, "your father's been calling people. He says you're unstable, that you're trying to ruin the family reputation because you're jealous of your brother." For a moment, the air drained from the room. I pressed my palms against the desk, steadying myself. "And people believe him?" Claire hesitated. "He's a respected man, wealthy, influential. People want to believe him." I thanked her and dismissed her gently, but once she left, I buried my face in my hands. Rage coiled in my stomach. It wasn't enough for them to steal what was mine, they had to smear my name too. 2 nights later, I agreed to meet my mother at her favorite cafe. She had insisted. "We need to talk, Makla, woman to woman." She arrived dressed impeccably, pearls at her throat, her hair styled to perfection, as if appearances could disguise the venom in her words. I sat across from her, staring at the steam curling from my untouched coffee. "Darling," she began softly, "you're making a fool of yourself. Digging through old papers, hiring men like that investigator, whispering to anyone who will listen. It's unbecoming." My jaw tightened. "Unbecoming? Mother, I'm uncovering fraud, a stolen legacy. Do you expect me to just smile while you and Dad erase me?" Her lips curved in a thin smile. "We didn't erase you. You were never meant for this role. You're strong in your own way, but the estate, our family name, needs a man to carry it forward. Eric may be flawed, but he's the son. That's how the world works." Her words struck like knives. I leaned forward, my voice sharp. "That's not how grandfather saw it. He trusted me. He told me I was the one to protect the legacy. Not Eric, not Dad, me." Something flickered in her eyes, quickly masked. She stirred her coffee delicately. "Your grandfather was sentimental. He loved you, yes, but love doesn't build empires. Discipline does, and your father made sure the will reflected what's best for the family." I stared at her, stunned by her bluntness. "So you admit it, you helped forge it." Her hand froze on the spoon for the briefest second before she smiled again, calm and cold. "I admit nothing, but I will tell you this. If you keep pushing, you'll destroy yourself. And when you do, don't expect us to save you." I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. My voice trembled with fury. "I don't want saving, I want justice." Her smile widened, almost pitying. "Justice doesn't exist in families, Makla. Only loyalty and betrayal. Choose carefully which side you're on." That night, I drove aimlessly through the city, her words echoing in my head. Loyalty and betrayal. Wasn't it betrayal when they stole from me? Wasn't it betrayal when they erased my name? I ended up parked outside my grandfather's house again, staring at the windows glowing softly in the night. It looked peaceful, almost innocent, but inside those walls was a crime scene dressed in fine china and silk curtains. I whispered to myself, if justice doesn't exist in families, then I'll make it exist in court. The attacks grew bolder. Anonymous emails appeared in my inbox, claiming I was mentally unstable, suggesting I had fabricated the draft will. One even attached a doctored photo of me looking disheveled at a bar, implying I was a drunk. At the firm, my supervisor called me into his office. "Makla," he said carefully, "I've been getting calls. Clients are nervous. They don't want to work with someone whose personal life is complicated." It was humiliating. My career, the one thing I had built entirely on my own, without my family's influence, was slipping through my fingers because of their lies. but humiliation has a strange effect. It either crushes you or hardens you. For me, it was the latter. I met Daniel that weekend, and he noticed the exhaustion in my face. "They're tightening the noose," he said, exhaling smoke. "Typical move. Break your reputation before you can build a case." I looked at him, eyes blazing. "Then we hit back harder. I won't let them bury me twice." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Let's go find someone who can tell us exactly what happened the night your grandfather signed that so-called will." My heart skipped. For the first time in weeks, hope flared again. If we could find the right witness, their lies would start to unravel. And deep down, I knew just who to look for, the people who had been in the room when my grandfather's hand was forced. Daniel tracked her down first. Her name was Nurse Evelyn Carter, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and a guarded demeanor. She had been one of the private nurses hired during my grandfather's last year, the one who had spent the most time at his bedside. "She's not easy to convince," Daniel warned me. "She left the position quietly after he passed. Might be scared of your family." That didn't surprise me. My father had ways of making people afraid. We arranged to meet Evelyn at a modest diner outside the city, the kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee and pie at midnight. She arrived in plain clothes, her hair tied back, looking around nervously before sliding into the booth across from me. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then I leaned forward, my voice steady but gentle. "Evelyn, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." She glanced at Daniel, then back at me. "Why now? Why drag all this up?" "Because my grandfather trusted me," I said quietly. "And because what happened to him wasn't right. I just want the truth." Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee. Finally, she whispered, "The night before he passed, your father came into the room with papers. Your grandfather was weak, his hands shook so badly he could barely hold a pen. I remember because I tried to help him sit up. Your father insisted he sign. He said it was urgent." My heart pounded. "What kind of papers?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "A will. I didn't read it all, but I saw the word inheritance at the top. Your grandfather resisted. He said he'd already settled it, but your father," her eyes darted away. "He leaned close and told him that if he didn't sign, the family would fall apart. He pressured him, and eventually your grandfather, exhausted and in pain, scribbled his name." The world seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table. "So you're saying he was coerced?" Evelyn nodded, her face pale. "I didn't want to get involved. But yes, it wasn't his choice. He was too weak. I'll never forget the look in his eyes." "Feated?" I felt tears sting my eyes, but anger burned hotter, pushing them back. I had suspected, but hearing it confirmed out loud was like a blade to the chest. My father hadn't just stolen paperwork, he had stolen my grandfather's voice at the very end of his life. "Will you testify?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Evelyn hesitated, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. "Your family is powerful. They could ruin me." Daniel leaned in. "And if you stay silent, they'll keep ruining others. You saw what happened. It matters." She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I saw her soften. I'll think about it, but I can't promise anything." It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Driving home that night, I replayed her words in my head. He pressured him, he was too weak. It wasn't his choice. Every syllable seared into me like fire. My father's betrayal ran deeper than I had dared to imagine. This wasn't just theft, it was cruelty, manipulation. Exploiting a dying man's last breath. When I reached my apartment, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the stack of documents, the draft will, the notes I'd written. My hands trembled as I whispered, "I'll make him pay. For this, for everything." But the universe has a way of tightening the screws when you start getting close to the truth. The next morning, I found my car tires slashed in the parking lot. All four. A crude warning, but effective. Neighbors shook their heads as they passed, murmuring bad luck while avoiding my gaze. Daniel wasn't surprised when I called him. "Classic intimidation," he said, "means we're on the right track." Right track or not, it terrified me. Every shadow on the street felt like it was following me. Every knock at the door made me flinch. My family wasn't just trying to silence me socially, they were ready to scare me into disappearing. But fear has a strange effect when mixed with grief and rage. It sharpens you. That night, I sat at my grandfather's old armchair in my apartment, the one piece of furniture I had taken before they locked me out of the house. Running my hand over the worn leather, I made a vow out loud. They thought coercion and forgery would bury me, but all they've done is hand me the rope I'll use to drag them down. It started with the feeling of being watched. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. The slashed tires, the note on my door, the stares from strangers, they had me on edge. But then little things began to pile up. My apartment door, which I always locked twice, once clicked open too easily when I came home late at night. A photo frame on my bookshelf had been moved half an inch, not by me. My laptop, always password protected, took a full minute longer to boot up one morning, as if someone had tampered with it. Daniel warned me, if they think you've got something, they won't just intimidate you in the street. They'll try to get into your life, your files, your mind. You need to be careful, Makla. Every move you make is being watched. One evening, I was coming back from work when I saw a man leaning against a lamppost near my building. He was dressed too casually for the cold, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes hidden under a cap. I walked past him, my heart hammering, and when I glanced over my shoulder, he was staring directly at me. The next night, he was there again. Same spot. Same posture. I told myself it was coincidence, but deep down, I knew better. The breaking point came a few days later. I returned to my apartment and found an envelope sitting neatly on my kitchen counter. My stomach dropped, my door hadn't been forced, my locks weren't broken. Whoever left it had a key or had picked the lock with surgical precision. Inside was a single photograph. It was me, sitting in my car, holding the draft will printout in my hands. The photo had been taken from a distance, through the windshield. My face was caught mid-expression, shocked, emotional, vulnerable. On the back, in thick black marker, someone had scrawled, "We see everything." I sank into a chair, the photo slipping from my hands. My body trembled with rage and terror. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. They were inside my life, watching my every move, violating the last safe space I had left. For the first time, I wondered if I could survive this. Not just win, but survive. I called Daniel, my voice shaking. They were in my apartment, they left me a picture, they know about the draft will. He cursed under his breath. They're escalating. But listen to me, Makla, that means they're scared. You've got leverage, don't let them break you. But if they can get into my apartment, I whispered, what else can they do? There was silence on the line. Then Daniel said grimly, anything they want if you let them, so don't let them. The next day, I changed my locks, installed cameras, even slept with the lights on. But no matter what I did, the sense of invasion lingered. I jumped at every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside. And yet, under the fear, another emotion grew stronger, defiance. They thought they could scare me into silence. They thought watching me would make me weaker. But every shadow, every threat, every silent photograph only confirmed what I already knew. My family had something to hide, and they would go to any lengths to bury it. I wasn't going to be buried. The following Sunday, my mother invited me again to the family house. I didn't want to go, but part of me knew it was better to face them than let them think they'd driven me underground. Dinner was tense, every word coated in honey and poison. My father spoke little, his gaze heavy, while Eric couldn't resist jabs about my lonely little apartment life. At one point, my mother leaned across the table, her smile fixed. Makla, darling, you look tired. Maybe it's time to move on from all this nonsense. You'd be safer if you just accepted things. Her tone was soft, almost maternal, but the message was clear. They wanted me afraid. They wanted me broken. I smiled back, sharp as glass. Funny, Mom. I was just about to say the same thing to you. For the first time, I saw her mask slip. That night, back in my apartment, I pinned the threatening photograph to the corkboard where I kept all my evidence. It wasn't just a scare tactic anymore, it was proof. Proof of how far they were willing to go, proof of their guilt. I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady, "You can watch me all you want, but you'll never stop me." It was my father who called me this time. His voice was clipped cold, as if he were summoning an employee rather than his daughter. "Makla," he said, "we need to talk, face to face, tomorrow, noon, my office." He didn't wait for a response before hanging up. I sat frozen with the phone still in my hand. For years, my father had been a distant, towering figure in my life, always judging, always calculating. But this was different. This wasn't a conversation request. It was a command. His office was downtown, on the top floor of a glass skyscraper overlooking the city. I remembered being dragged here as a child, forced to sit quietly in the corner while he conducted business, his voice booming across the room as if he owned not just the company but the world itself. When I walked in this time, I wasn't a child. I was his opponent. He didn't rise to greet me. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a leather chair framing him like a throne. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting sharp lines across his face, making the deep creases around his mouth look even harsher. "Makla," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Sit." I stayed standing. His mouth twitched into a small, humorless smile. "Still stubborn, I see, just like your grandfather." I folded my arms. "Don't compare me to him. You betrayed him. You betrayed me." The smile vanished. His eyes turned to steel. "What I did for this family. You wouldn't understand. You're too emotional, too fragile." Fragile, the word made my blood boil. He trusted me. He wanted me to have the estate, the company, the house. You stole it. My father leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the desk. I corrected his mistake. Do you think the board, the shareholders, the partners would respect a young woman running everything? Do you think they'd follow you? No, they'd eat you alive. I gave the family stability. I laughed bitterly. Stability. Eric is bleeding money into gambling debts and you're covering for him. That's your stability? His jaw tightened. He hadn't expected me to know. Watch yourself, he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. You're walking a thin line. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I could hear the hum of the city outside, cars moving far below, the faint echo of footsteps in the hallway. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharp. I know you've been digging. The draft will, the nurse, the investigator, all of it. My stomach dropped, but I forced my face into calm neutrality. He continued, his voice chillingly casual. You think you're clever, but you're not. You're a child playing lawyer, and if you don't stop, you'll regret it. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. It's a promise, he replied. Drop this, walk away, or I will destroy you. Your career, your reputation, your life, you will have nothing. I stood there, my pulse roaring in my ears. For a moment, I was that little girl again, shrinking under his voice, desperate for approval that never came. But then I remembered my grandfather's last words. You'll take care of what's left when I'm gone. I straightened my shoulders. You already destroyed me once, I said. When you erased me from his will, you can't do worse than that. My father's eyes narrowed. Don't test me. I turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to look back at him. I'm not testing you, father. I'm holding you accountable, and you're terrified of it. His face twisted, rage flashing for the first time. You think you can win against me, against this family? I met his glare head-on. I don't think I know. And with that, I walked out. Outside the office, I finally let myself breathe. My hands were shaking, my chest tight, but beneath the fear was something stronger, clarity. My father had just revealed his hand. He knew what I was doing, and he was scared enough to try to intimidate me. That wasn't weakness on my part. That was leverage. Daniel listened carefully when I told him what happened. He blew smoke from his cigarette, shaking his head. He's rattled, that's good. But be careful, Makla. Cornered men are dangerous. I know, I said softly. But so am I. Eric was always the weak link. For as long as I could remember, he had been the reckless one, the one our parents covered for, the one who thought money could buy loyalty, silence, or both. If my father was iron and my mother was ice, Eric was fire, uncontrolled, wasteful, dangerous mostly to himself. That weakness became my opening. Daniel suggested it first. He's arrogant, careless. He'll slip if you let him talk long enough. You just need to be there to record it. I hesitated. The thought of secretly recording my own brother made my stomach knot. But then I remembered Evelyn's trembling voice as she described my grandfather's last night. I remembered the photograph left in my apartment. My hesitation evaporated. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Eric invited me, if you could call it an invitation, to a party at a downtown bar. Family should stick together, sis, he'd said smugly, as if we weren't at war. I showed up in dark jeans and a blazer, blending into the crowd of his equally reckless friends. Music thumped against the walls, neon lights casting garish colors over their drunken faces. Eric was already several drinks in, holding court at the center of a booth piled with empty glasses. When he saw me, he grinned, raising his whiskey. Well, look who decided to crawl out of her cave, little Miss Justice herself. His friends laughed. I forced a smile and slid into the booth across from him. Just here for a drink, Eric. Sure you are. He leaned closer, breath heavy with alcohol. You know, it's pathetic, really. All this digging you're doing. Dad's not gonna let you win. Mom's not gonna let you win? Hell, even I wouldn't let you win. I sipped my drink calmly, my phone recording silently from my jacket pocket. Why not? He smirked. Because it's already done. Signed, sealed, buried. Granda didn't even know what he was signing. He was out of it, barely conscious. But Dad shoved the pen in his hand and bam, history rewritten. My heart stopped. He had said it, out loud. I kept my face neutral, though inside I was screaming. Sounds like you were there, I said carefully. Oh, I was, he slurred proudly. I was right there. I saw him fight it. I saw him say no. But Dad made him do it. Told him if he didn't, we'd lose everything. And you were never gonna get it anyway. You're just not cut out for it. His words blurred as the alcohol pulled him deeper into arrogance. He laughed, slamming his glass down. Honestly, I should thank you, sis. Without you, I wouldn't be swimming in all this cash. Maybe I'll buy another car tomorrow. Why not? Dad'll cover me. I excused myself shortly after, leaving him to drown in his own ego. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold, clearing my head. My hands trembled as I pulled my phone from my pocket, stopping the recording. There it was. His words, his voice, his confession. Proof. I leaned against the brick wall of the bar, breathing hard, my pulse racing. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was evidence. When I played the recording for Daniel the next morning, his eyebrows shot up. "Well, damn," he muttered, rewinding a section. Eric's voice slurred through the speaker. Dad shoved the pen in his hand, and bam, history rewritten. Daniel looked at me, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Makla, this is gold. It won't be the final nail by itself. He's drunk, unreliable. But paired with the nurse's testimony and the draft will, this is devastating." I felt a surge of triumph so strong it almost scared me. For months, I had been fighting shadows. Now I had their voices admitting the crime, but victory came with a cost. That evening, Eric called me, his voice hoarse, sober this time. "What did you do?" I froze. "What do you mean?" "I don't remember everything from last night, but I remember talking. Too much. And you set me up, didn't you?" I said nothing. Silence was my only weapon. His voice dropped to a growl. "You think you can use me against Dad, against Mom? You're playing with fire, Makla." And fire burns. The line went dead. For hours afterward, I sat in my apartment, the recording playing over and over, Eric's words echoing like gunshots. He had handed me a weapon, yes, but now he knew it. And if I had learned anything about my family, it was this: they wouldn't just defend themselves. They would attack. Still, as I listened one last time, I whispered to myself, "It's too late. You gave me exactly what I needed." The balance of power was shifting, and for the first time, I wasn't the one on the defensive. The recording from Eric gave me leverage, but leverage wasn't enough. I knew the courts, I knew the law. Judges didn't move on drunken confessions alone. What I needed was iron, not smoke. Documents, numbers, something so undeniable that even my father's influence couldn't twist it into dust. That's when Daniel called me late one evening, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "Makla," he said, "I think I've found it. The crack in your father's armor. Meet me tomorrow. You'll want to see this with your own eyes." His office was a small, cluttered space above a pawn shop, where the blinds never seemed to open and the stale scent of coffee lingered in the walls. He spread out the papers across his desk like a magician laying down cards. "Your father's been moving money for years," he began, tapping the first page with his nicotine-stained fingers. "But here, this is new. A transfer of $5 million pulled directly from your grandfather's trust, labeled as an emergency estate consolidation. The problem?" He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "The date is 2 weeks after your grandfather died. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That's impossible." "Exactly." His smile was grim. "The dead don't authorize wire transfers, which means someone did it in his name. That's fraud, Makla, not just inheritance disputes, criminal fraud." He slid another sheet toward me. The paper was thin, the ink faint, but the trail was there. The money had been funneled into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under the name of a shell corporation. A shell that, of course, led straight back to one of my father's business partners. I stared at the evidence, the words and numbers blurring as rage flooded me. It wasn't enough that they had stolen my inheritance. They had used my grandfather's death as camouflage for a larger theft, one that lined their pockets and buried their crimes deeper than any grave. For the first time, I saw the true scale of it all. My father hadn't just silenced me to protect Eric or to keep the family name neat and polished. He was protecting himself. He was protecting years of corruption. I left Daniel's office clutching the papers like they were sacred scripture. The air outside was icy, but inside I was burning. I thought about my grandfather, his hands trembling as he signed under duress, and I realized the cruelest truth of all. My father had exploited not just his power, but his dying breath. That night in my apartment, I spread everything across the kitchen table. The draft will, Evelyn's testimony, Eric's confession, and now this, cold, hard proof of financial fraud. For the first time, the puzzle was beginning to make sense. And with every piece that clicked into place, the danger pressed closer. Because not long after, my phone buzzed. An unknown number, one simple message. "Stop this now, Makla, last warning." Attached was a photo of me leaving Daniel's office that afternoon. My heart stuttered, my throat closed. They were watching, close enough to catch me mid-step, close enough to send a message that they could reach me whenever they wanted. The next morning, I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. At the firm, I dressed in my usual blazer, tied my hair back, forced calm into my face. But when my supervisor, Mr. Clark, called me into his office, I knew immediately something was wrong. He was a cautious man, one who valued order above all else. He didn't meet my eyes as he spoke. "Makla, I've received complaints, calls from clients. They say you're distracted, unstable, that your personal issues are bleeding into your work. The words hit harder than I expected. You believe them? I asked. I don't want to, Clark admitted, his voice heavy. But perception matters. For now, I have to pull you from all high-profile cases. I need to protect the firm. It was a knife to the chest. My career, the one thing I had built on my own, the one thing my parents couldn't touch, was slipping away because of them. Because they wanted me erased, not just from the will, but from every corner of my life. I walked out of his office with my head held high, but inside, fury coiled like a snake. They wanted to strip me of everything until there was nothing left. Fine, let them. A woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous enemy of all. That night, Daniel poured me a cup of bitter coffee and slid it across the table. His eyes studied me, sharp through the haze of smoke. They're tightening the screws, he said. Classic tactic. Break your reputation before you can bring the fight. I wrapped my hands around the cup, steadying myself. Then let them. Every move they make, every lie they spread, it only proves one thing, that they're terrified. And terrified people make mistakes. Daniel leaned back, nodding slowly. And when they do, I looked down at the papers spread before me, the red string of connections I had started mapping across the corkboard in my apartment, and I felt my resolve harden into something unshakable. When they do, I said quietly, I'll be ready, and I'll make sure the world sees exactly who they really are. I always thought my job would be untouchable. The law firm wasn't just my career, it was my sanctuary, the one thing I had earned without my family's help, the one thing that was mine alone, but I should have known better. My father's shadow stretched farther than I realized. The first signs were subtle. Clients stopped requesting me. Colleagues began to avoid me in the hall, their polite smiles thin, strained. Then came the whispers I wasn't meant to hear. Her family drama, bad press, maybe she's not stable. One morning, Mr. Clark summoned me to his office again. His face was drawn, his voice unusually soft. Makla, he began, I fought for you, I really did. But the partners, they're concerned. The pressure from certain donors, certain influential voices, they've decided it's best if we part ways. The words slammed into me like a wrecking ball. I gripped the arms of the chair, fighting to breathe. You're firing me because of lies? Clark sighed, his eyes full of pity. Because perception is everything. You're brilliant, but brilliance can't outweigh scandal. I'm sorry. Sorry. The word rang hollow in my ears. Sorry didn't pay rent. Sorry didn't erase the years I had poured into building a reputation from nothing. Sorry didn't fix the fact that my own father had poisoned the one place where I was more than just someone's daughter. I walked out with a cardboard box of my belongings, law books, case notes, the framed photo of me and my grandfather at my law school graduation. My hands shook as I carried it down the elevator, past people who wouldn't meet my eyes. On the street, the autumn wind bit into my skin. I stood there with everything I had left from a decade of work in one small box. For the first time in months, my knees nearly gave out beneath me. Back at my apartment, I dropped the box on the floor and sank onto the couch. The silence pressed in, heavy, suffocating. Without work, without stability, I felt stripped bare. They had taken my inheritance, my reputation, and now my career. Piece by piece, they were dismantling me until nothing remained. For hours, I sat in the dark, staring at the photo of my grandfather smiling proudly beside me. My chest ached, my throat burned. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to cry until I was empty. But then I heard his voice in my memory, calm and unwavering. A document isn't just ink, it's honor. Honor. That was what I still had. That was what they couldn't steal. Daniel showed up that evening, uninvited, carrying 2 greasy bags of takeout. He didn't ask questions when he saw my tear-stained face. He just set the food down and cracked open a beer. They pushed you out, he said simply. I nodded, unable to speak. He leaned back, lighting a cigarette. Good, now you're free. I glared at him through the blur of my anger. Free? They destroyed me. Daniel blew smoke toward the ceiling. No, Makla, they think they destroyed you. But all they did was take away your distractions. You don't have a job holding you back now. You don't have to worry about pleasing partners or clients. All you have left is the fight, and that makes you dangerous. His words settled into me like stones sinking into water. He was right. I had nothing left to lose, and nothing left to lose meant I could finally give everything to this war. That night, I gathered every piece of evidence, Evelyn's testimony, Eric's confession, the fraudulent transfers. I laid them across the table, a map of betrayal and greed. My hands stopped shaking. My tears dried. They thought they could erase me by destroying my life. But all they had done was carve away the noise, leaving behind a blade sharpened to its edge. I touched the photo of my grandfather, his warm eyes meeting mine. They've taken everything from me, I whispered. but I still have you. And I'll honor you the only way I can, by tearing them down piece by piece. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not comfort, not safety, but clarity. I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was fighting for survival, and I would not lose. Losing my job felt like the final nail in the coffin. For days afterward, I moved through my apartment like a ghost. The blinds stayed closed, dishes piled in the sink, unanswered messages blinked on my phone. I barely ate. I barely slept. My body went through the motions, but my spirit had gone silent. I would sit on the couch at night with my grandfather's photograph in my lap, staring into his kind eyes. I whispered into the dark. I really tried. But I can't fight them anymore. They're too powerful. I'm just one person. One daughter they already wrote out of the story. The more I said it, the more I believed it. That maybe I was foolish to think I could ever win against them. It was Clara who broke through the fog first. She had been my closest friend at the firm, sharp-eyed and quietly loyal. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, carrying a bag of groceries and the force of her stubborn kindness. "Makla Zimmerman, open the damn door," she shouted, banging hard enough to rattle the hinges. When I finally let her in, she took one look at me and didn't bother hiding her dismay. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell," I muttered. She set the groceries on the counter, pulling out pasta, soup cans, bread. "Good. Then we'll start small. Food, showers, real sleep. And when that's done, you're getting back up. Because I know you, Makla, you don't quit." "I already lost," I said, my voice cracking. She stopped, her hand on a loaf of bread, and looked me dead in the eyes. "No, you were pushed down. That's not the same thing. Losing means it's over. And I know damn well you're not done." Later that week, another knock came. This time it was Michael, one of my old professors from law school who had always admired my tenacity. He carried a stack of folders under his arm. "I heard what happened," he said, settling heavily into a chair. "Your father's influence is a rot in the city, but rot leaves traces, and you've already found some." He pushed the folders toward me. "Here's more: public records, tax filings, corporate audits. Look closer. I think you'll find patterns." I stared at him, stunned. "Why are you helping me?" "Because your grandfather once helped me," he said simply. "He believed in me when I was a nobody. Now it's my turn to believe in his granddaughter." His words cracked something open inside me, a reminder that not everyone was against me, that my grandfather's legacy wasn't just money or property, it was the people whose lives he had touched, people who remembered, people willing to stand with me. That night, I spread Michael's folders across the table beside Daniel's evidence and Clara's groceries. The three of them had become an unlikely lifeline, each holding out a thread that tethered me back to the world when I had been ready to let go. For the first time in weeks, I felt the fog lift. The fight wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had seen my father's cruelty, who had felt his corruption, who had been silenced but not erased. I wasn't alone. I looked into the mirror the next morning, brushing the knots from my hair, pulling on clean clothes. My reflection was pale, thinner than before, but my eyes burned with something new. Resolve. I whispered it aloud to anchor it. "I'm not finished. I'll never be finished until they face the truth." The weight of despair loosened in my chest. My family thought they had buried me, but they had only planted me deeper. And now I was ready to rise. The date of the court hearing was set: 3 weeks. 3 weeks to bring down the empire my father had built on greed and intimidation. 3 weeks to prove that my grandfather's last wishes had been stolen from him and from me. Every day became a war room. My small apartment turned into a battlefield of files, sticky notes, and red strings mapping connections across the corkboard on the wall. Evelyn's testimony, Eric's drunken confession, the fraudulent transfers Daniel uncovered, the public records Michael had given me, each piece was a weapon, and I sharpened them with relentless focus. Daniel practically lived on my couch during those weeks. He sat with his laptop glowing in the dark hours, muttering as he dug through shell corporations, offshore accounts, and hidden trusts. Clara stopped by after work with food, forcing me to eat. Even Michael called in favors, convincing colleagues to analyze documents and prepare affidavits. It was exhausting, terrifying, but for the first time I felt like we weren't just reacting. We were building an offensive. But the closer the hearing came, the more suffocating the pressure became. One night, as I sat rereading Evelyn's statement, a rock shattered my window. I jumped, heart racing, glass spraying across the floor. When I leaned out, I saw a car peel away into the night. No note, no voice, just the message: "We're watching, we can reach you." Daniel was already on his feet, pulling me back from the window. "They're desperate," he said grimly. "That's good. Desperate people make mistakes." But as I swept up the glass, my hands shaking, I wasn't sure if I believed him. The following morning, I received an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a copy of my lease termination notice. My landlord had been encouraged to cut ties with me. By the end of the month, I'd be homeless. I sat at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands. My father wasn't just attacking me in court, he was stripping away every foundation I had left. He wanted me broken before I ever stepped into that courtroom. Clara was furious when she heard. He can't keep doing this. There has to be some way to stop him. There is, I said quietly, clutching the lease notice until it crumpled. We win in court. That's the only way. The closer we got to the date, the more I lived in two worlds. The one where I was Makla the daughter, still haunted by childhood dinners in silence, and the one where I was Makla the fighter, assembling a case that could shatter that silence forever. At night, I would wake in cold sweats, hearing my father's voice in the dark. Drop this. Walk away. Or I will destroy you. But then I would see my grandfather's photograph, still on my nightstand, and I would remember the steadiness in his eyes. You'll take care of what's left when I'm gone. I whispered back into the dark. I will, I swear I will. The night before the hearing, Daniel found me hunched over my corkboard, reviewing every thread of evidence again and again. Makla, he said gently, it's ready, we're ready. What if it's not enough? I whispered. What if they bury it, spin it, buy the judge, twist the truth until I look like nothing but a bitter daughter? Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Then we fight again. And again, until it sticks. Because you don't stop, you don't quit. That's why I signed on to help you. I looked at him, at the man who had seen me at my weakest and still believed. For a moment, the fear lifted. That night, I slept for only 2 hours, tossing between nightmares of losing everything and dreams of finally being free. When the sun rose, I dressed in the same black blazer I had worn the day I confronted my father in his office. The fabric felt heavier than before, but also like armor. As I gathered the files into a single binder, I paused at my grandfather's photo one last time. I touched the frame gently. Tomorrow, they'll hear the truth, I promise. And with that, I walked out the door, ready to face the storm. The courthouse loomed above me like a cathedral of judgment, its marble steps cold beneath my heels. The air inside buzzed with murmurs, reporters hovering near the entrance, cameras flashing as soon as I stepped through the doors. I kept my eyes forward, clutching the binder of evidence like a lifeline. When I entered the courtroom, my family was already seated at the opposite table. My father sat tall in a navy suit, his expression unreadable, but his eyes met mine with the same silent challenge he had thrown at me my entire life. You will not win. My mother sat beside him, her pearl necklace gleaming, lips pressed into a line of disapproval. Eric slouched a few seats down, smirking, though I could see the faint twitch in his jaw. I took my seat with Daniel at my side. My pulse pounded so loud I thought the whole room could hear it. The proceedings began with formalities, the attorneys trading opening statements like practiced blades. My family's lawyer painted me as a bitter daughter, unfit to inherit, desperate to smear the name of a respectable patriarch. I clenched my fists, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat. Then it was our turn. Daniel stood, his voice steady, measured. He spoke of honor, of legacy, of a granddaughter wrongfully written out of her inheritance. He laid out the roadmap. The draft will, the nurse's testimony, Eric's words, the fraudulent transfers. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to take shape for the court. Still, I could feel the weight of skepticism in the air. Judges wanted more than whispers and paper trails. They wanted certainty. That certainty came when Evelyn took the stand. The courtroom hushed as the frail nurse adjusted herself in the witness chair, her hands trembling slightly as she swore the oath. I had visited her so many times, but now her voice carried with unexpected strength. I was there, she said firmly. The night Mr. Zimmerman signed the second will. He was weak, barely conscious. He didn't want to sign, he said, this isn't right, Makla should have it. My breath caught. Evelyn had never told me that part before, she continued, her eyes glistening. But Mr. Zimmerman's son, her father, stood over him. He told him the family would fall apart if he didn't sign. He put the pen in his hand. He held it there until the signature was done. I'll never forget the look in Mr. Zimmerman's eyes. It was fear, pure fear. The courtroom erupted. Gasps echoed through the gallery, the judge banging his gavel for order. My father's face darkened, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might break. For me, it felt like a dam bursting. The words I had fought so long to prove were now spoken aloud under oath in front of the court. When cross-examination began, my father's lawyer tried to tear Evelyn apart. He called her memory unreliable, her motives suspect. But Evelyn held steady. I was his nurse, she said simply. I cared for him every day in those final months. I know what I saw, and I know he didn't want to sign that paper." Her voice cracked on the last words, but the truth in them rang like a bell. The judge ordered a short recess. As we left the courtroom, the hall buzzed with whispers, reporters scribbling furiously. Daniel leaned close to me. "She gave us exactly what we needed," he murmured. "This isn't just a family squabble anymore. This is coercion, fraud, maybe even criminal charges." Your father's mask just cracked. I glanced toward the far end of the hallway where my father stood surrounded by his legal team. His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something flicker there. Not disdain, not arrogance. Fear. When the session resumed, the tide had shifted. The judge's questions were sharper now, his gaze lingering longer on my father's side. Every objection from their lawyer sounded weaker, thinner, like paper shields against a storm. And though the fight was far from over, I felt something stir deep inside me, a flame that had almost gone out now roaring back to life. I wasn't the bitter daughter anymore. I was the heir my grandfather had chosen, and for the first time, the court was beginning to see it. The second day of the hearing began with a tension so sharp it seemed to hang in the very air. My father's face was stone, his lawyer's words more frantic, more defensive. Evelyn's testimony had ripped a hole in their carefully constructed wall of lies, and now the court smelled blood. Still, I knew it wasn't over. My father had built an empire on intimidation, and he wasn't about to let it crumble without dragging me through the mud. Their side called witness after witness to paint me as unstable, greedy, estranged. Old family friends, business associates, faces I had once trusted, stood and repeated the script my parents had fed them. Each time, I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe through the humiliation. The judge's eyes narrowed with each repetition, as though he, too, sensed the choreography. But I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that the noise might drown out the truth we had fought so hard to gather. Then the bailiff called the next witness. Eric Zimmerman. My brother rose from his seat, swaying slightly as though the very act of standing cost him. He adjusted his tie, shot a quick glance at my father, and walked slowly to the witness stand. I braced myself. I had heard Eric smear me 1,000 times in family dinners, in public, in private arguments. I expected more of the same, smirking lies, half-truths, anything to shield himself and curry favor with our father. But when he was sworn in and the questions began, something in his face shifted. "Mr. Zimmerman," my father's lawyer asked smoothly, "can you confirm that your sister Makla has a history of hostility toward your parents and has attempted to undermine the family estate for her own benefit?" The expected script. The easy answer. Eric's lips parted, but no sound came out. His gaze flickered toward me for a brief second. His eyes, bloodshot, tired, met mine, and I saw something there I had never seen before. Shame. He swallowed, then said quietly, "No, that's not true." The courtroom seemed to inhale all at once. My father shifted sharply in his seat. "Eric," he hissed under his breath, too low for anyone but us to hear, but Eric went on, louder this time. "It's not true. Makla isn't greedy, she isn't unstable. She's telling the truth about all of it." The lawyer froze, stammering. "Perhaps you misunderstood the question?" "I didn't," Eric snapped, his voice breaking through years of submission. He looked at the judge now. "My sister's right. My father made our grandfather sign that will when he wasn't capable. I was there, I saw it." Gasps exploded through the courtroom. My heart slammed against my ribs. Eric's face was pale, sweat beating at his temple, but his voice carried. I stood by and said nothing. I let him do it. I let them cut her out, because I was weak, because I wanted my father's approval more than I wanted the truth. But I can't keep lying, not under oath. For the first time in my life, I saw my father's mask crack. His face twisted, his hand gripping the table like he might tear it apart. "Eric, stop this," he barked, his voice echoing across the chamber. But Eric didn't stop. His words spilled like a confession he had been waiting years to make. He took everything that was supposed to be hers. He told me if I stayed quiet, if I played along, I'd be taken care of. And I did, I let it happen. But it was wrong. His eyes flickered to me again, raw and broken. "I'm sorry, Makla, I should have stood up for you sooner." The judge's gavel thundered, demanding order as the gallery erupted in chaos, reporters scribbling furiously, whispers bouncing off the walls. I sat frozen, my breath caught between disbelief and a strange, painful gratitude. My brother, who had laughed at my pain, who had profited from my erasure, was finally standing beside me, not because he wanted to save me, but because at last he wanted to save himself from drowning in the lies. When the recess was called, I stepped out into the hallway, the noise of the crowd muffled behind me. Eric approached cautiously, his shoulders slumped. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, his voice hoarse. "I just couldn't keep lying anymore, not when I saw what it was doing to me." I studied him, searching for the brother I once knew. Maybe he was gone. Maybe this was only guilt, only desperation. But still, his testimony was the knife that cut my father's case wide open. "You made your choice," I said quietly. "And maybe, for once, it was the right one." Inside, I caught my father's glare burning into me, rage and betrayal twisting his features. He had lost control of his son, of the narrative, of the story he thought he could script. For the first time, it wasn't me on trial. It was him, and everyone in that courtroom could see it. The courtroom was silent as the judge shuffled the stack of papers before him. Each sound, the rustle of pages, the gavel tapping against the wood, echoed in the room like thunder. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Daniel beside me, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles turned white. Across the room, my father leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed to slits. My mother sat rigid, her pearls gleaming like armor, refusing to look at me. Eric, pale and drawn, slumped with his head bowed, avoiding everyone's gaze. The judge cleared his throat, and the entire room leaned forward. After reviewing the testimony, the documents, and the evidence presented, his voice was deep, deliberate, the kind that carried finality. "This court finds that the second will of the late Mr. Robert Zimmerman was signed under coercion and is therefore invalid." A rush of air escaped my chest, like I'd been holding my breath for months. The judge went on, his gaze steady. "Accordingly, the court recognizes the original draft will as the valid testament of the deceased. The primary beneficiary, as stated in that document, is his granddaughter, Makla Zimmerman." The room erupted. Reporters surged forward, voices overlapping, cameras flashing in a frenzy. The sound was overwhelming, but all I could hear was the echo of the words in my head. Makla Zimmerman, primary beneficiary. I turned to Daniel, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't let myself shed until now. He gave me a rare, crooked smile. "You did it," he murmured. "Against all odds, you actually did it." I pressed a hand to my mouth, choking back a sob. For months I had lived in fear, in anger, in grief. And now, finally, the truth had spoken louder than the lies. My father shot up from his seat, slamming his hand on the table. "This is outrageous." "She manipulated everyone, bribed witnesses." The judge's gavel thundered. "Enough, Mr. Zimmerman, sit down." But my father wasn't used to being silenced. His voice cracked with fury. "This family built everything she has. She is nothing without me." I rose slowly, turning to face him. My voice was calm, steady, louder than I thought it could be. "You're wrong. I am everything in spite of you." For a moment, his face twisted, and I saw the man I had feared all my life reduced to something smaller. Not invincible, not untouchable, just a man who had finally lost. When the gavel fell one last time, I knew it wasn't just the end of the case. It was the end of his control over me. The reporters crowded as I walked out of the courthouse steps into the bright afternoon light, microphones shoved toward my face. Questions flew. "How does it feel? What will you do now?" But their voices blurred into static. I looked up at the sky, the warmth of the sun breaking through clouds, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I whispered softly, just for myself and the memory of the man who had believed in me when no one else did. "We won, Granddad. We finally won." The day after the ruling, I drove out to the countryside estate that had been at the center of this war. The road curved through autumn fields, the trees tinged with gold and rust. When the house finally appeared, its stone walls rising against the horizon, my chest tightened with a mixture of grief and relief. It was the first time I had returned since the funeral. The last time I had walked those steps, I'd been shoved aside, told I had no place there, no right to claim what my grandfather had wanted for me. Now the key was in my hand. The heavy front door creaked as I pushed it open. Dust lingered in the air, shafts of sunlight filtering through tall windows. I walked slowly through the foyer, my footsteps echoing against marble floors. The chandelier still hung above, its crystals dulled with neglect. But in my mind, I saw it lit, casting warmth over family dinners that had always felt more like battlegrounds. I climbed the stairs, hand brushing the polished wood of the banister my grandfather had once leaned on. In his study, the air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. His books still lined the shelves, spines worn from his hands. On the desk, I found his fountain pen resting where he had left it, like he might walk back in any moment and finish a thought. I sat in his chair and let the silence wrap around me. For the first time, it wasn't heavy. It was comforting. Memories flooded back me as a little girl, curled up on the rug while he read case law aloud just to amuse me, telling me, "Knowledge is a weapon, Makla, use it well." He had given me this house not because it was grand, but because he knew it would anchor me. Because he believed I was strong enough to protect what mattered, and I had. Tears stung my eyes as I whispered, "I hope I made you proud." In the weeks that followed, I began the slow work of restoring the estate, not just its walls, but its spirit. I reopened the library to local students, just as my grandfather had once dreamed of doing. I established a scholarship fund in his name, using the assets that had been stolen from me and returned through the court's decision. Reporters still called, hungry for more of the family drama, but I no longer felt the need to answer. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, about honoring a man who had given me everything when the rest of the family had tried to strip me bare. One evening, I walked through the gardens as the sun set, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold. Clara had come by with wine, Daniel lingered on the porch smoking, Michael's students roamed the library inside. Around me was life, messy, imperfect, but alive. For so long, my family had tried to convince me I was alone. But here, standing on the land my grandfather had left me, I finally understood the truth. I had never been alone. I had allies, friends, pieces of him living on in every choice I made. I stopped by the old oak tree where my grandfather used to sit with me, teaching me to play chess on a battered wooden board. I placed the board there now, its pieces set for a new game. And I said into the evening air, "Checkmate." Walking back toward the house, I felt lighter than I ever had. I wasn't just Makla the daughter, Makla the outcast, Makla the plaintiff in a courtroom battle. I was Makla Zimmerman, the heir, the fighter, the survivor, and this was only the beginning. I've been asked more times than I can count how it feels to win. Reporters want sound bites, neat little quotes that fit into headlines. Triumphant, they want me to say. Vindicated. But the truth is more complicated. Winning didn't erase the scars. It didn't bring back the years my father's shadow stole from me. It didn't undo the nights I cried myself to sleep, convinced I was nothing but the disappointment they said I was. What it did was free me. Free me from their grip, their voices in my head telling me I was unworthy. Free me from the constant hunger for approval that was never going to come. Free me to live as my grandfather always believed I could, on my own terms. If you're listening to this, maybe you know what it's like to be written off. To be silenced, ignored, told you don't matter. Maybe your family did it. Maybe your boss. Maybe the world itself. And maybe you've believed them. I know I did for a long time. But here's what I learned. They don't get the final word. You do. The fight almost broke me. There were days I wanted to give up, days I thought the weight of it would crush me. But every time, something pulled me back. A memory of my grandfather's voice, a friend showing up with food, a stranger's kindness. Little sparks that reminded me I wasn't alone, no matter how much they wanted me to believe I was. And those sparks lit a fire I couldn't put out. So yes, I won the case. Yes, I inherited the estate, the wealth, the house. But those aren't the victories I carry closest to my heart. The real victory is that I looked into my father's eyes, heard him say he would destroy me, and I stood anyway. I didn't flinch. I didn't bow. I am still standing. And if you're in that place, if you're fighting a battle that feels impossible against people who should have loved you but instead chose to break you, I want you to hear this from me. You are stronger than they think. Stronger than you think. The house is quiet tonight. The library is alive again, the garden tended, the halls echoing not with secrets but with laughter from people I trust. My grandfather's photo sits on my desk, and sometimes when the light hits just right, I swear I can feel his presence in the room. I know he would be proud. But more importantly, I am proud of myself, of the woman I've become, of the voice I refuse to let them silence. This isn't just my story, it's a reminder. They can take your name, they can take your home. They can even take your job, your reputation, your place at the table. But they cannot take your will to fight back. So if you're wondering how it feels to win, it feels like breathing again. It feels like looking at the ruins they left behind and realizing you can build something better. It feels like standing in the sunlight, unshaken, unbroken, and saying, "I am still here." And that's everything.